flanked between two adults. He's in the orange jumpsuit. The judge there on the left said she found probable cause. He's been charged with 17 counts of murder. She says there's probable cause to hold without bond. He's been assigned a public defender, the woman to the right of him, and he's being processed. 2 words he said. When the judge asked him a question, he simply said, "Yes, ma'am." His head down low. This lasted maybe 3 or 4 minutes and turned around and left.
And now you have prosecutors working hand in hand with investigators with BSO, federal investigators with the FBI, now building a case against this young man, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz. Simmons Nicole Ensalada is at that site where we just had that news conference with first responders. Nicole, what have you been able to glean from this news conference? Obviously, you've been at the scene since yesterday. You know, these first responders sharing their take on what they lived through yesterday there in Parkland.
Well, sadly, we weren't able to ask them any questions. We did try. We wanted to know a little bit more about the sort of the circumstances of pulling him over, of finding Nicholas Cruz walking down the street. And as you know, he was wearing a shirt that was the colors of the high school, and he had blended himself in, according to BSO, with all of those students who were leaving. So it sounded like, you know, he had a plan to escape. This wasn't going to be one of those situations where, you know, he planned to kill himself or anything like that. It looked like he was working on escaping. So whether or not it seemed that he was taken into custody without any incident, that is what they said yesterday, but whether or not there was any conversation between the two, we simply just don't know. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we heard also from the chief over there at the Coral Springs Parkland Fire Department, and he said, as we've heard this many times before, that they do get those possible active shooter calls every so often, and so there really wasn't any reason for them to believe that this could be anything different. And then it started to dawn on them. You know, I spoke to a police officer off camera several hours ago who said that this was the worst thing he'd ever seen. He'd never seen anything like this, and he also said that the kids streaming out of that school was just unbelievable. So obviously it seemed like it was very, very obvious once they arrived here that this was certainly no drill. This certainly was something that was not going to be unfounded. So just to, you know, of course these guys, when they come before the cameras, they seem very calm, cool, and collected, and they talk about their training, but you know, boy, they're human too, and this was a really difficult situation for many of them. Many of them, as he said, the chief said, they cannot unsee what they've seen. These are trained professionals. Imagine, as they've mentioned, the students and what they've seen as well. We've only seen snippets on some cell phone video. As disturbing as that is, imagine those kids who are in those buildings, in that building, that freshman building, for so long. So we're hoping we will get some details, some further details from some of these officers later on.
All right, Nicole, thank you. And back to what we're talking about in terms of getting a little more information in terms of the timeline of the alleged gunman's actions. We heard yesterday several times students say they had a fire drill earlier in the day. The fire alarm was pulled allegedly by the gunman to create some confusion, and kids were confused and ran out of the building, which officials are saying was part of his plan. He has been charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder. And as we just heard, Michael Leonard, Coconut Creek PD, who says he was first to encounter him, as we just talked about, it sounds like, you know, he allegedly had a plan to blend in, as we've been talking about, with all the other students running out of the building and then just casually walking down the road about 1.5 miles from where the school is located to be apprehended here on the right. And I mentioned this to Jeff earlier today. I was at a school today where there was an event, and I spoke with an administrator here in South Florida who said that they, here in Miami-Dade County, and I'm sure in Broward County as well, all the school administrators are going to be going over their lockdown procedures because so many of us, teachers included and children included, get complacent when it comes to these lockdown procedures. And we just heard a first responder, Fire Chief Coral Springs, say that, you know, we weren't sure if this was the real event, but when we heard kids screaming, we figured out it was. So a lot of our administrators are going to be going over the lockdown procedures because many times she was saying that when there is a lockdown, teachers keep teaching because there's so much pressure to keep teaching and do the work. But in fact, they need to follow procedures, put your phones down, be quiet, lock the door. because of something, anything can happen. It could be a serious situation, or it could just be a regular event when it comes to a lockdown.
Yeah, and to that point, they very quickly have to process whether it is real or not. And that being said, and we heard from Broward Sheriff Scott Israel earlier today, we've already seen a number of copycat incidents throughout the county, and they're taking those very seriously. I can't remember the name of the school, but there was a school that was on lockdown earlier today for a short time. Got some cell phone video out of a classroom there, and same thing that we saw yesterday at Stillman Douglas High School. They had to go room by room to clear out those rooms to make sure that it was not a real incident. Now, this is from yesterday, cell phone video inside of a classroom, as this was still an active shooting situation. I believe there is some natural sound on this. Let's go ahead and listen if we can.
You recognize every single person in this room? I'll do a count with you. Stay here. Everything stays on this floor. Stay here for now. Well, is there one underneath you?
No. Yes.
13.
Well, you can hear the weeping and the terror in children's voices, and you can hear the teacher, presumably the teacher there, saying very calmly and repetitively, "Stay calm." Boy, these poor kids, everybody was in that building. Just our hearts and compassion go out to everybody. So the latest